To get the repositories, we're going to do basically the same thing. And I'm starting to see a lot of repetition, right? I'm going to have to do the same make the client, same do the get, same do the read the response body. So I think we can make another function to help us, okay? Rather than copy and paste this, I can make a function that does this for us, right? And so the way I think we want to do that is down here, function, get API or something. And, or let's call it, we're not going to do any posting, so we'll just do, it'll always be get. We need to pass in the endpoint. And I think we also need to pass in the thing we want to fill. So the idea is I'm going to call make API request, give it a pointer to the object I would like it to fill, and it will do the rest for me. So we'll call that destination, which is, what's the type? Interface, because it's anything. And I expect this to be a pointer, but it's just interface. And that will return an error, okay? And what we're going to do, so I said make API request. This is a function we're going to use in each of these, okay? And it's just going to make this code a lot less by putting it in here. And this guy is going to have all of this code inside of it, okay? Whoops. Or some of this code anyway. Okay. So client, and then we do get and GitHub API URL plus endpoint plus, and there we go. So now we made it a little more generic. We'll pass in the endpoint. And then down here, instead of ampersand data, we say DST for destination. Delete this guy and just return the error. Okay. So now we have we make a client, we do a client fetch. Now we don't have to repeat this access token bit, it'll do it for us, and we can hand it what we want on margin. So up here we should change this here, so the log should go down here. We'll just call it response, get %s response, be the endpoint. So it'll say like get / user and response or whatever. And then up here, this becomes a lot simpler. So we'll still need this var data, but we won't have to do this anymore. That, that. Okay, so now this is a lot simpler. I create my endpoint, and then I have my data, and I make an API request. This will fill the data here with whatever I get from this endpoint, and then I just do the thing I was doing before. So now to get the repositories, oh, here it is. Get repositories is this. I just call make, or API.make API request. Give it the endpoint, which is /orgs/org here /repos. So I should just replace that with the organization. And that should give me what I'm looking for. So I don't know what the data is going to look like, so I'm just going to give it that, and we'll fill in the data. Okay. So that's how we do the get repositories, make an API request to /org/ and then the organization, and then /repos at the end. And And that should list all the repositories, and we should see it in our log here so we can see that whatever requests we got. So a bunch of data, right?
Or the refactor.
That's a lot of
I
data.
can refactor all that, pop a single error.
Holy cow, how much data is in here? This is ridiculous. Okay, well that's going to be hard to piece apart, so let's look at the API. Repositories, list organization repositories. So that's what it looks like. This is why it's so much data. There's like tons of stuff in here. But all we need is the name, right? Right, that's all we need is the name. So this returns a list of objects, so we just need to make that our struct. So inside of here, what do I do for the data? What's the type of the data?
Type of the data is string.
Struct.
It's a slice of struct, right? Because this is multiple repositories. Each repository has ID, owner, name, full name, description, and so on. All we care about is name, so I'll just have name, string, name, okay? Now, like above, I have a list of structs with each have a name property. I need to convert it into a list of strings, so I just do the same thing I did above, right? I just do this. Except now it's not login, it's name, okay? And so now I should have the list of repositories. So we have every organization, every repository. Now we need to get all the shots, okay? So just to make sure this is working, let's see if we can actually see the repositories in the output. Let's see what we get. The build fill. Oh. Empty string. That's not cool. There's clearly data returned, so why did we get the empty string? Did I not return it? That would do it. And that's why you do this in small steps, because once you have the whole code written, it can be really hard to track that down. Okay, there we go. So those are all the repositories inside of that organization. And so now we have a list of those. We can plug in the rest, right? So now I can get the user commit SHAs. The way we do that is we look in the API again, right? And so now we want to get, for a repository, the commits. So list commits on a repository. So this is what we want to do. The other thing we can do here is you can pass in author equal and make it only show the commits for that author. Okay, and this is the other bit we need to do, the since. Okay, so we need to add those two things. So how are we going to do that?
You could adjust the get API call to take in the URL values
Okay,
for extra rules.
I think it's a good idea. So we should have values, URL.values. And then what we can do here, whoops, what did I just do? Is if values is nil, make URL.values. So we'll just make it so you can pass a nil if you want for the values. And then we'll say values.add, and then access token is the API access token. And then instead of this, we can say plus values.encode. Okay. So now we've made our API a little more flexible. We can pass in the URL values, and now all we have to do is change this guy and make API request here. We can just pass in nil because we don't have any extra values, so we can just pass nil there and pass nil here. Okay. But now it's more flexible, like King was saying, so we can use it for this guy. So what am I going to do here?
You gotta create values.
Yeah. So what's it going to have in it based on this? Right. We're going to need author and since. Let's do author first. So we say author. The author is, where do I get the author from?
Whatever the GitHub user ID was.
Yeah, API.username. Remember I saved that to the API. So now I have that. We're going to need since too. I have since right here. Right. But it's a time. I have to convert it to a string. We use format. Remember that? What's the format? ISO 8601 format. It just turns out that's already a pre-canned layout in the time library, so we can say ISO, I think it's in there. What the? Apparently it doesn't like numbers. This is the same format, I think. So let's use that format, RFC33. Right, okay. So that's where we'll pass that in. So now we have our two values. What else do we need? We need an endpoint, right? What's the endpoint? The endpoint goes up here. We want the commits, so it's /repos/ the owner, which is the organization, remember, / the repo, which we have up here, /commits. Okay, and so that'll be the endpoint. Now what do? We have the endpoint. We need to make data. It's going to be a slice of something. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but we can look at the API to tell us. So in the GitHub API, it talks about the data that's returned from this endpoint that we're going to be calling, this endpoint. And it says that it has a list or an array of objects. Each object has URL, SHA, HTML, URL, so on. All we need is the SHA, right? So that's the only property we're going to need in here. And now I can do API.make API request, give it the endpoint, the values, the destination, and that returns an error. And then I have the same issue I had before. I need to convert that to a list of strings, so I just copy this. Names become SHAs, and v.name becomes SHA, okay? And so now I have my list of repositories. Sorry, I have the list of repositories, now I have my list of commits. So let's log them just to see them, so we can see that. Should go after the error. Oh, it's going to be nuts. I suspect. We may have already, at this point, we may exceed our API quota. So we did a get to the organization, then we got the list of repositories, and now we're getting commits for every single one. See, it's taking a while for each one. And boy, they're all returning empty. That's interesting. That's because I haven't made any changes to any of these packages in the last month or whatever we asked for. And so that's why it's not returning anything. But you can already see that this is getting very slow, right? So we may exceed our 60-second allotment pretty easily with the way this is going. And that's why we're going to have to use a scheduled task to do this.
So it's 60 seconds for the entire thing.
Man, we got something.
So, like, since it
Yeah, the whole
hasn't gone
thing.
back to the command line again.
It's still chugging away in the browser here. It's still spinning up here. So that's what I mean. It's a very slow process.
Will the dev server return an error for 60 seconds?
I don't know.
I think it does.
We got under 60 seconds, so we're good. But now it's going to get really slow. So, because now we have to add the last bit, get a single commit. Right now we're just doing nothing, and add it to the additions and deletions. And so let's do that. And then we'll have all the pieces we need to finish this. Okay, so to do that, we need to do the same thing we did up here. So let's look at the API docs for getting a single commit, which is right here. This is the endpoint. Endpoint : that, right? Except now we got to replace it with all the data. So the owner is the organization. The repo is the repository. The SHA is the SHA. Okay, that's the endpoint. Now we need the values. Actually, we probably don't. It doesn't have any parameters. So values can be nil. We don't need that. We do need data. It's going to be a slice of struct. Each one will have a bunch of fields. All we care about is stats. This guy, okay? So that's what we're looking at here. So let me just add that so you can see it. So that's what we care about. So the way we create that is we call stats, which is itself a struct, JSON stats. And stats has additions, which is an int, and then deletions, which is an int, and that's all we care about, okay? So that's how we create the data, and then we call error : API.make, API request. The endpoint is the endpoint, the values is nil, the destination is the ampersand data. If there's not nil, return it. In this case, stats.additions equal data.stats.additions, and deletions the same way, okay? What does it? Oh. We have to loop. I think. No, it only returns one, right? Yeah, it's just one, so it's not a slice. So take out the slice. There we go. So, let me take this off. Okay, so now we have our endpoint. This gets a single commit. We do so based on the SHA, which we passed in. Then we have the data. The data we're going to fill with from the JSON using the API make request. And so we'll get the additions to deletions. We'll add them to the stats here and then return them. Okay, and so now at this point, we have.
Can you show the struct again? Just one more time. The struct. Data struct, and then just a struct inside. And that's the variable stats and the type is struct, right? That's how
Yeah.
That's how you read that.
So we can get it by doing data.stats.additions. Additions is here, stats is here, the struct is there.
Cool.
And that's how, when you have all those embedded objects, it's an easy way to get to them. So for our whole loop here, we get the organizations. For each organization, we get the repositories. For each repository, we get the commits. And then for each commit, we get the stats. And then we add those stats to the end. So if this worked, we should get some actual data now, though it may take a while.
Should we lay down some bets?
I'm going to guess the hundreds of lines changed.
I'm going to guess you're not going to finish. You're not going to get them all.
That's one possibility. So I'm guessing that it will finish in the low hundreds, and you're saying it's not going to finish at all, which is
No,
Also very possible.
it'll return as many as it got while it finished, before it finished. Will it return as many as it got before it finished?
No,
It might be.
it'll just kill it. Yeah.
It'll try to make requests and get an error back instead.
I mean, there was only one,
There was only one that you actually did anything on.
Yeah.
yeah.
With a whole lot of subfiles on it.
It's so slow.
What the hell was that? The routine error thing,
How could we make this go faster?
cache,
Go
which
routine.
ones don't have it.
Go routines, thank you. That is the correct solution. We could add go routines to make this faster, but it did actually finish. 14, so I was very wrong. I only added 14 lines of code in the last month to my GitHub on that. So any questions about what we're doing here? You can see though, it took like a minute for that to actually work. It was really slow, and that's too slow for a request. Requests are supposed to be fast. You want requests to be under a second, okay? In general, that's a good ballpark. Really, you want it under 100 milliseconds. People have done studies on what users are willing to put up with, particularly for a public site. That threshold is pretty low, okay? If it takes a certain amount of time, users will give up, and they'll stop using your website, okay? And so under a second, that's just a rule of thumb. But, so if you have requests that take a long time, maybe it's time not to do that in the request. The way we do that is using a task.